by the head of state of my own country that a great many people are paying close attention to, both near and far, and that is on the subject of which Catholic is likely to be installed into one of the most important positions in my country. Due to the nature of the position and to the prevailing attitude of some in the process, this is going to get very uncomfortable to watch over the course of the next several days and weeks. So be prepared for that. The core of the issue isn't some process related to sovereign authority, however, it is a part of a larger issue, and that issue is the antipathy to the church by the adversary. And by adversary, I mean Satan. It takes many forms, and I am suggesting you brace for it because it's been ramping up lately and will continue to do so in the foreseeable future. I won't be talking about particular persons today. I mean, you know who they are, and frankly, I have some reservations about some of the names involved, but nothing too serious in the short term or relevant to the work I do on this channel. But instead, we're going to talk about the spirit of the age, or the spirit of this period in our history. We must take this seriously because if we don't, we will come to regret it. Let's dive into this. But first, I wanted to say thanks to the patrons of this channel, whose support keeps these messages coming. Your support is deeply appreciated. If you want to support the work of this channel, especially in these times when Catholic voices for truth are quietly being pushed aside and things seem very uncertain, you can do so by clicking that join button below your screen if you're on YouTube, or by joining us on Patreon or Subscribestar. Options in general are in the description box of this podcast episode. Supporting the work of Catholic Voices helps keep these messages coming. So thank you, and again, thank you to our patrons of this channel. Now, on to our story. Does the dogma live loudly in you? I hope that it does. The adversary has always made that accusation against those that it perceives serve our Lord. It's a phrase that became famous in recent years and has popped up again in discourse given to things related to the big event in November. There is a tacit assumption that the convictions and belief that you might hold privately in a higher power cannot be held in the public sphere at all, at least if it's any of the variations of those related to Christ. That assumption is due to what some call the public civic philosophy, which places strict adherence and moral authority in the sovereign. Put more plainly, if the sovereign permits something, then it is by definition good or acceptable. We need only to look to history to see the absurdity of this. I mean, do I need to point out the landmark cases prior to the decades of the 1860s as an illustration of this? Yet this idea not only persists, but is stronger than ever before, and all must accept it. Look around you if you do not believe me. What is going on in the culture right now? What has been going on since the start of the year? This new sense of civic virtue is rooted in this broader idea, and certainly institutions are essential to keeping that idea going, and anything that might change the direction of that civic philosophy leads to certain quarters of society turning to the agents of chaos to restore what they consider to be the civic philosophy. It's an inversion of the concept of civic virtue. I use the term agents of chaos to describe numerous things, really. This concept goes beyond the obvious, however. It is a wide, encompassing term, and in this case it includes anyone, and I do mean anyone, who serves the adversary in this capacity. What we will see, and in fact have already seen, is the faith being the subject of the discourse, and not in any way that we would want, and not in anything resembling an accurate portrayal of it. I mean, imagine if the figures we were talking about were attending Mass with the SSPX or the FSSP, for example. There are numerous homilies online from either group that would cause the agents of chaos to get worked up into a lather. This would manifest into the real world for everyday people, as seen in San Diego and the FSSP parish there. It really doesn't matter for the agents of chaos that the person we're talking about here is part of the charismatic Catholic renewal, which is the source of some of my reservations, specific to that particular part of the charismatic renewal. That has already been the subject of much gnashing of teeth from the agents of chaos, not because it's part of the charismatic renewal, but because it is a convenient means of undermining the person in particular. This would be no different if this were the SSPX or an FSSP person who attends Mass with those groups, except that their homilies tend to rub up against the spirit of the age we live in, the spirit of Antichrist that we see now, in ways that the typical person on the street is just not familiar with. But let's be real. Coterie of Moloch and its agents of chaos want to preserve the Moloch issue and the consequences of it at virtually all costs. Do not underestimate what this will look like when the rubber meets the road. Even if the issue of immediate concern in the secular realm is resolved quickly due to some kind of masterful use of the mechanisms of the sovereign, put this in context for the Coterie of Moloch and its perception of Catholicism, and you get a bigger picture. much bigger than the issue of the day. The reaction from the coterie of Moloch is more than a little revealing. We've seen this from virtually all quarters, and the reaction makes me wonder a bit if there is something supernatural at play here. I use the term coterie of Moloch on purpose because this issue is as much a spiritual one as it is a material one, if not more so, to be honest, and if not primarily a spiritual one. Because the fact is that when my fellow Catholics support the coterie of Moloch, there is a massive problem. Go look at any Catholic page on Facebook, for example, and read the comments and replies when you see these stories being posted. That issue with the priest telling you that you cannot be involved in the Moloch issue in any way caused a lot of responses, and frankly, the responses illustrate the state of the church more than anything else. Don't believe me? Again, go to Facebook and read some of the replies to these posts, or on Twitter, or probably on YouTube here. You'll see what I mean in stark detail. But let's not lose sight of something. This isn't only an issue where I'm from. We are seeing church property being subject to this. We are seeing relics and the incorrupted saints being subject to this as well. In Sicily, a parish experienced this firsthand in the past week, and the opinion makers took their sweet time before they decided to talk about it. Why? Because they themselves are part of the agents of chaos. Their tools are not those we see being highlighted on the daily basis, but instead are slightly more subtle, because though most people don't seem to be falling for it anymore, they're still there. The Sicily case really isn't anything new, though. This has been happening nearly every day someplace in the world for years, and close to home for several months now. Why? Because of the spirit of the age. We live in an age where our first and primary concern is ourselves. That should concern everyone, regardless of whether they share our convictions or not, because this statement is not sustainable in the slightest. The domino effect of turning inwardly, like we have, are astonishing, and many of the consequences are problems that everyone should be on board trying to address. And yet, instead of people coming together, we have our parishes and relics and even incorrupted saints being brought into this. The spirit of the age is fetid, and there's nowhere to shelter from it. Consider that for a moment, and remember that as we enter the weekend and the days that follows as this process unfolds. I'm going to end by asking you this question. Have you prepared yourself spiritually? I mean, this is kind of an odd question to ask at this late point of 2020, given that this has been an interesting year, to say the least. If you haven't at least gotten a better idea of the nature of those things undermining your spiritual health by this point in 2020, then I get on that as soon as possible, and work on your sanctity as well. But there are other things you'll probably need to do as well, given how these things just seem to be going. The spirit of the age continues to grow more fetid and inhospitable to the Christian, and thus we must be ready for what comes next, whatever that will be it over the weekend, into the coming days, or in the coming weeks, months, and yes, even years ahead. Don't let yourself get caught unawares as the world continues to roll out the welcome mat for the adversary and his progeny. Thanks for listening. I am Anthony Stine. Please pray for the Church. Ave Maria.